Let me go ahead and get us started here. And then, all right. So let's see, let's get us started here. All right. So welcome everyone to Family to College Seminar number 2, where we'll be explicitly talking about FIT and exploring ways in which you can support your child in conducting effective college research at this stage of their college process. To give you guys a little bit of a heads up, of a little bit of a to-do list about where students and families should be at this juncture. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you are sharing your family letter with your child's college counselor and scheduling a meeting between yourself, your child, and your child's college counselor. When you're scheduling meetings, please do make sure that you are scheduling them with a time that we're all free. Our expectations is that students do not miss class for a college counseling meeting. We do recognize, though, that there has been a lot of limitations due to schedules. The junior class have very limited free periods, and a lot of them happen at the same time. So I recognize, and Lynn and I recognize that creates some challenges in finding times to meet in the immediate future. So if you are having issues with finding a common time to meet with your counselor, please let us know, and we're happy to work around our schedules and figure out a creative solution for whatever it may be. I also want to make sure that at this juncture, everyone has access to SCORE. We're going to be talking a lot about SCORE today and SCORE's functionalities, but SCORE is going to be one of the major tools that we're going to be utilizing to ensure that the many processes of the college process, it's a helpful tool at this juncture to help begin crafting a research list for your child. And it will become increasingly more important from a pragmatic element for us, as this is the tool that we will use to send documents to colleges. We'll talk about that piece in the future, but if you have not yet been able to log on to SCORE, please make sure that you reach out to your college counselor. We will resend you an invitation, and we want to make sure that all families have access to SCORE. And then the next piece on the to-do list is really thinking about spring break. Spring break is upon us. Perhaps you already have plans, perhaps not. Perhaps there is some college considerations, or perhaps it's just pure family enjoy time. And of course, do what's best for you and your family. But if you are thinking about colleges, if you are thinking about engaging with this process, there are a couple of helpful tools, tips rather, that we have that we would want you to consider. So first things first is utilizing what's free, available, and accessible to all, right? So now in the era that we live in, college tours and information sessions happen virtually. So you can engage in these opportunities to learn about a variety of different schools and never leave the comfort of your home. And I really, really, really encourage you guys to engage with this. Of course, we recognize and understand that a physical tour is an experience that cannot be replicated online and virtually, but we also know the reality that you're not going to be able to visit every single school that your child may be thinking about. So really do utilize virtual information sessions as a beginning point. It can be a great way to knock schools off of the list, right? So if you sit in on a session and your child doesn't seem interested in what the school is and how it's presenting itself, then you saved yourself time and resources visiting the college. So engaging in these virtual sessions can be really, really beneficial. And again, especially if time, resources, or anything are factors of consideration. If, though, you are thinking about college touring either in the spring break or sometime in later parts of the year, then I would say help your child identify a few anchor schools. So schools that they know they're interested in, they're curious to learn more about, they seem most engaged about, and then plan some tours of colleges in the vicinity, right? If you're in a big metro area, it can be a lot easier to do this. If you're traveling by car, then I would say consider schools that are within an hour radius of where that college is located and go visit these institutions. At this juncture of your child's process, we're really emphasizing exploration above anything else, and variety is a part of that exploration. So help them see big schools, small schools, technical schools, liberal arts colleges, research institutions, women's colleges, schools in a city, schools somewhere more rural, so on and so forth, so that your child really can begin to envision what's right for them, what's most ideal, and what's most optimal. And the only way they can really begin to understand that is by seeing what's out there and perhaps even contrasting how that may differ from their day-to-day life here in New York. And these are all really good and important learning moments for them. Importantly, as I mentioned, we're in that exploration phase. So we want students to lean more into curiosity than certainty. We don't need kids to know where they're applying to by tomorrow. In fact, we're not going to ask for a final college list from your child until November of their senior year. So there's ample time to explore and consider what's out there. And we want you to take advantage of that time. And especially now, if they're not certain what they want, lean into that curiosity to help excavate what it is that they do want, what it is that they're responding to, or perhaps what is it that they are kind of resisting, and exploring a little bit as to why. And then lastly, build in some fun. College tours are very tiring. I, as a college counseling professional and someone who weirdly loves going on college tours, even in my free time, know that when you're on the ground walking for 2+ hours just for one school, it's a lot of information that you're taking, and it requires a lot of physical energy. So make sure that you are sculpting in some downtime. Make sure that you're exploring the communities that these colleges are surrounded by. Make sure that if it's an experience that will get your child even more excited about the prospect of a college tour, that you're building that in. So it's not just an overwhelming information dump, right? So as much as you can, definitely try to build some fun into those experiences. And lastly, just as a reminder, we are going to be taking all of our juniors on a college tour on April 25th and 26th. That is a Thursday and that is a Friday. They're going to be excused from classes for those 2 days, and this is going to be free of cost. So everyone is going to be able to join. And we're going to be visiting Amherst, University of Connecticut, Clark, the College of the Holy Cross, and Wesley University. So schools that represent a variety of different types of institutions, sizes of institutions, locations of institutions, religiosity, so on and so forth. So I want you to see this both to know that if there are any schools that you can perhaps take off of your college list so that students can visit it with us, that's amazing. But also think about it in terms of planning and the range of schools that we are going to expose our children to over the course of those 2 days. We encourage you to take a similar approach to help your child see a range of institutions so they can better understand what they want the most. So as you are thinking about fit, and we're thinking about college considerations and what matters for your children, there are going to be so many different perspectives and values and needs and wants and hopes and dreams and desires that are going to emerge from conversations with students, right? And how each student weighs each of these categories and preferences will differ student from student. Some students are going to care more about some of these preferences over the others, and that's okay, right? Our job right now is to help them explore what matters and what matters for them, and helping them kind of disassociate what their friends are doing from what it is that they want, right? As I tell my students, this is 4 years that they're living and experiencing something new. While we can't over predict or predict what will happen in the future, what we can do is really think about optimization and think about which communities are going to be the best fit for them, considering the people that they are now and the people they hope to become in the future. So just recognize that there's going to be so much that may emerge, and it will emerge at different times as well. Some kids already know exactly what they want and can articulate that really, really well. Some other kids struggle quite a bit and don't know where to begin, and that's okay. We need to give our children grace to figure it out, because again, this is where we are right now. We're in the stage of exploring and figuring it out. So let's give everyone that space to be able to do that, and we'll come at that together. Another way to really think about this is thinking about it as a Venn diagram when we have conversations about fit. And that's something that you'll hear me and you'll hear Lynn talk about often. As you engage with admissions professionals, you're going to hear this phrase over and over and over again. And one way to visualize this is a Venn diagram, right? And understanding that on one end, we're thinking about the student, who they are, what's important for them, their identities, their values, their dreams, their hopes, their goals, their aspirations, and making sure that our students can clearly identify that and clearly articulate that, even if it's just for themselves, so that as they're looking at each school, they're going to interact with schools that they're being presented to schools in a particular kind of way, right? Colleges are still businesses. Admissions offices are business model, right? They want to sell you on an experience. They want to sell you on something that's ideal. So they're going to show you the very best of what the institution has to offer. And when we're looking at these institutions, it's not just about the ideal of the institution, but it is about the pragmatic and tangible resources that are available at each of these institutions of learning, right? So courses, professors, research opportunities, facilities, sports, you name it, right? It's the idea and what the college has to offer. But when we think about fit, it's that convergence of these two ideas. It's understanding who the student is, centering their needs first and foremost, and then evaluating each school against what it is that matters for your child, right? There's going to be lots of amazing schools that are going to be good for different reasons, but there are going to be many schools that are not good for your child because of what they want and what they're seeking, right? So the more that we help students really center themselves in this conversation about fit, the more it is that we can have an intentional college search process. Another kind of visualization to think about this is to think about it in terms of four distinct categories, right? The personal, the social, the academic, and the financial. And when we think about preferences, I would say that there are preferences that are going to fall under all four of these categories, but the size and the importance for each of these categories is going to differ student to student, family to family, right? But seeing this visualization could be a great way to begin thinking about preferences and having conversations with your children about preferences so that they're really understanding the many ways in which we're having them engage with the college process and really helping them understand that it is an academic experience, but it's also a social and a personal experience as well, right? And that we want to make sure that they're in communities that they feel seen, heard, valued, and uplifted, and also be at places where they're going to be challenged in really positive and affirming kinds of ways, right? And financial is the one where for some families, this is not a consideration, but for others, this may be an important and driving force. And understanding how that interplays for your family and for your child is really helpful for us to know and be in partnership with so that we can find the best opportunities for your children. So SCORE, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the tools that we're going to be using pretty heavily throughout the college search process, and it has a lot of great functions, one of which is their Discover tool. So while there are a variety of search engines that can help you find schools based on a number of criteria, SCORE has this functionality already built into it. It has about a little under 4,000 colleges across the US and internationally as well, for your children to begin filtering based on their preferences. And we're going to walk through what these filters look like on SCORE, but we're using those filters as proxies and considerations for broader conversations. If you've already had your second meeting with your college counselor, the family meeting, perhaps a lot of this sounds similar. Perhaps you kind of see where our thought process is. But if you haven't had your second meeting yet, or you're curious about how it is that we engage with students in conversations about fit, this is a really great way to begin and start the conversation. So the first filter is going to be about academic focus, right? And we want students to really think about here is what kind of classes do they want to take in college? What are their curiosities? What are they excited to engage more with, right? And I'm using that language in particular really intentionally because some students can associate the kind of classes they want to take with the majors that they want to pursue, right? But others are a little more uncertain, or perhaps they have a broad idea of what they want to explore, but they don't have an idea of specificity, right? In a particular direction that may take them to. And that is all okay. So in this example here, if you type in literature, you can broadly search by colleges that have majors that fall within the category of literature. But when it provides more specific information, you can see that SCORE is also filtering by more concentrations or subdivisions within that larger academic focus, so that if your child does have specific interests, let's say in African languages, then they can find schools that are going to have majors in that particular area of focus. It is not every student, though, that has this level of certainty, and that's okay. It is absolutely fine to be undecided. In fact, many students apply undecided once they apply to college. And when I was working at Penn and in their admissions office, we read lots of students who were undecided, and that's okay. because it's a big difference between I'm undecided, but I have a lot of different interests, or I have a couple of interests, and I don't know necessarily where I'm going to go with these things, but I know that that is what captures my attention and what I'm curious to learn more about. And in college, figure out what I can do with this particular discipline. And that's incredible. And that's amazing. And that undecidedness can help us find different opportunities. And that is very different from I'm undecided because I don't want to go to college. I'm not seeing the value. I don't like studying. I don't like school. And if that is your child, that's okay too. But we have to recognize that perhaps that's a different conversation. And maybe we have to have a conversation with them about, is college the right fit? Is it the right move? Is it the right move right now? Right. So a lot of our work too is also normalizing that there isn't a linear path for just everyone, and that we can explore different ways and different pathways beyond Brooklyn Friends. And the more we normalize it, the more students feel okay with where they are in their particular process. It's also okay if your child's interests don't align, right? You can have a child who's interested in fashion design and chemistry, or engineering and literature. These things don't have to be connected with one another, and they certainly don't have to be connected to a career interest, right? Some students, again, have really clear visions for their future, and they know how to get there. And bless them, really, if they get to college and continue on the same path. That is certainly some students' journey, and that is amazing. But so many, I know myself included, zigzag. We're figuring it out. I changed my major probably 4 or 5 times before I landed on sociology, and I don't know how I landed on sociology. It sounded kind of interesting when I was registering for classes, and then once I took my first sociology class, it all started to click for me. But I didn't know that going into college. And especially as a first generation student, no one in my family could have helped me make that connection. But we want to make sure that this doesn't mean that if you don't do a particular major, you are now excluded from a particular field of career, right? Certainly there are and can be some exceptions, but we just want to make sure that college is an opportunity for continued learning, growth, and exploration. And if a child doesn't know what they want to do for their career, that's fine. No one is expecting them to know. So let's make sure that we're collectively taking the pressure off from figuring that piece out. The last piece I want to talk about in terms of academics is that while in the context of the United States and a more liberal arts environment, being undecided is absolutely fine. If your children are thinking about studying internationally, and especially in the UK, you need to know what you want to study, because these can be 3-year degrees or more fast track degrees that are going right into that particular field of study. So if your child is thinking about studying internationally, please make sure to have a conversation with your college counselor, because we have to think about the academic program slightly differently. And that will always depend as well, not only on this institution, but on also the country. But I want to make sure that we're also highlighting that point for you all. Another filter, it has to do with degree types. So we have 2 different pathways for students to get into higher education. There's a 2-year associate's degrees, which by and large could be tied to more technical degrees that are also opportunities for really stable jobs, right? So dental hygienists or folks who work as med techs, these are careers. And I know folks in my life who work in hospitals who are making 6 figures and have only gotten a 2-year degree, and they're really happy and this works for them, right? So this is a pathway option for some students. For others, if it's not them seeking a technical degree, but perhaps are looking for a springboard to a 4-year degree, then a 2-year option can be really great. 2-year schools are going to be a lot cheaper. 2-year schools can be a great way to get through general education requirements before transferring into a 4-year institution. Again, it may not be the pathway that most of our students would take, but it's important that they know that that is an option for them. Most of our students are going to be pursuing bachelor's degrees. So they're 4-year degrees within the context of the United States. Most commonly, they're either getting a bachelor's of arts or a bachelor's of science in their particular majors. Bachelor's of arts are more focusing on the liberal arts, really focus on a well-rounded education, really focusing on breadth versus depth in some instances. And perhaps a bachelor's of arts, while certainly could be more aligned with the humanities over the sciences, the idea here is that there is greater flexibility for exploration outside of your particular academic major. Versus a bachelor of science, which is more found in more technical fields and more STEM fields, but certainly there are even some humanities degrees in which you might get a BS. Those degrees are focusing on greater depth. Sometimes they're requiring more specialization, more upper division courses, additional thesis or coursework, or perhaps even more credits, right? So those differentiations may not be critical at this juncture of your child's process, but understanding that these differences exist can help them navigate the kinds of communities that they want, right? So if your child is really focused on STEM, really wants access to research, and really wants to live, breathe science and math, engineering in more intentional and really purposeful kind of ways, then perhaps a BS will be better suited for your child than a BA. But those are considerations that would matter more once the child is in college, but knowing that these differences exist is always helpful. Lastly, you may come across a variety of different type of pre-professional programs. So like a bachelor's of fine arts, a bachelor's of science and nursing, a bachelor's of science and social work. These are more intense programs in preparation for those particular fields. For a BFA, for students who are thinking about conservatory style of education, they're going to be living, breathing the arts, right? Whether it's the fine arts, performing arts, or anything else, they're really experiencing a really intense academic experience that's focused in on the arts. Nursing and social work are similar in that they're both programs that lead to accreditation, and they have bigger governing bodies, which may save time in the future if they want to get advanced degrees in either nursing or social work. So if your child has inklings about either of those fields, it's worthwhile to consider if a college offers a bachelor's of science in nursing or a bachelor's of social work. There's some other specialized degrees, such as a law LLB, a bachelor's of engineering, or a business administration degree, which again can signal an opportunity for more intensive study, but they aren't a requirement to get into those particular fields. Getting an undergraduate degree in law doesn't mean that you can skip law school. You still have to go to law school. Except, fun fact, if you study in Ireland and you study law in Ireland, in 3 years, you will graduate and you will be eligible to sit for the New York State bar exam, which is pretty cool that some of these international institutions have these kind of agreements with different states across our country to save time and save money. So like your child could be a lawyer at 21 years old. That's pretty incredible, right? But if they're staying in the US, they're going to have to go to law school. If you want to be an engineer or you want to get into business, these degrees, while helpful, aren't the only exclusive pathways into those particular career fields. So just keep those pieces in mind. Size is going to be a really important one and a really big one. And what I encourage students to not get too fixated on is the number, right? They attend Brooklyn Friends School. The upper division is less than 200 students, right? So even a school that's 2,500 students is going to be significantly bigger, right? And it's a little bit of an arbitrary exercise to think, well, what if it's a 3,000 student body or 4,000 student body, right? You don't necessarily know what that experience will feel like until you get there. But there are questions and considerations that your child can be thinking about, right? And we encourage you to help them think about community and connection. Think about how it is that they relate to other people. Are they really easy at making friends? Do they struggle a little bit more? Is your child the child who will be the big fish in any pond that they're in? Or is your child a little bit more reserved, okay with being in the background, and doesn't need a lot of attention or a lot of eyes on them? Does your child thrive in more intimate environments where they know people will know who they are? Or are they okay with seeking those connections on their own when it makes sense for them to do so, right? Are they comfortable approaching professors because they've done that at Brooklyn Friends? Or is that an area of continued growth for them? Because these can all be signals for your child to think about if they really would mesh better in smaller, bigger, or larger schools. What we want to help disassociate, though, is that small does not mean a lack of quality or lack of opportunities. I went to a small liberal arts college, and I think we had an abundance of opportunities for all students given the size of the school. It's actually pretty impressive. When I went to grad school at a much bigger place, yes, there was more things because it was a bigger school. It was a school of 20,000 people between undergrad and grad school, but that also meant more people competing for these opportunities, right? So it just looked and felt different. So So it's important to help students make those connections. Another piece that I also help them think about in particular is their first year experience. For all schools, the deeper they get into their major, more likely than not, the class sizes get bigger, I mean, smaller rather. Professors will know them better. They'll be able to make those connections, right? But in a small school, my biggest class was 70 people, and it was a history of Earth and life class that I had to take for my science requirement. And that was my biggest class. Most of my classes were probably 12 people or fewer. So it was, this spanned a variety of different academic areas. And for me, that was awesome. I loved seminar style learning. Again, I liked knowing my professors. My professors knew who I was. I knew them. I knew their children. I've been invited to their homes. Like that sense of community just felt really palpable, right? But if you sat in on our webinar with our alumni who were talking about their experiences attending large flagship universities, for all the schools that were represented, every student had an experience with a lecture of 400 plus people. And that can feel really jarring because it can feel a little bit isolating. But again, if your child is comfortable getting to know the professor, going to office hours and speaking with them, whether it's because they need help or they just want to make a connection, then you know they'll be okay in a larger institution. If your child is good at just taking notes and absorbing information in the lecture, amazing. That's probably not going to be their every year experience, but that may be more common their first year than not, right? But if you know your child well enough to know that's not going to sit well with them, this is not good for how they like to learn. The anonymity actually doesn't feel really good. Or my child needs a little bit more structure, and I'm afraid about how they would thrive in a setting where no one knows if they're in class or not. Then perhaps again, this is when conversations about size can be really, really, really essential. Also, another setting here is about campus setting. So where is the geography of the particular school? Is it in a city? Is it in a suburb? Is it somewhere rural? Is it somewhere in a town? This is somewhere where I would help and encourage you guys to really talk to your children about, because as folks who grew up in New York City, they may have a very skewed sense of what's a suburb versus what's an actual true rural location, right? But in these conversations, what's important for you to consider is to understand who your child is, how they like to live their
Yeah,
life,
we've
and
already had the
they need.
conversation with mom. She said it's an allergic reaction to
Muting that real quick. Okay. So you know who your child is, you know what they want, you know what's important for them, you know how they live their life, and importantly, you know what they value, right? So is your child someone who you don't know where they are because they're traveling and traversing New York City and hitting up museums or coffee shops or restaurants or galleries or going to concerts or going to movie theaters, and like they're bred and tried and true city kids? Do you think that if they're in a more of a college environment, if they're removed from that, will they be happy? No, then that's something to consider, right? Does your child want access to green space, loves hiking, loves the outdoors, is really at their best and they're most centered when they're in nature, right? Then perhaps somewhere more rural or suburban could be better for them. Does your child want to be in a college town? Do they want to be in an environment where everything around them is all about and centered around that college? Then perhaps a town or a college town would be a better fit for them. You may know this really well. Your child may know this of themselves really well. But what I always encourage students to think about is when they leave school, after school, on the weekends, what is it that they like to do, right? They're going to be living somewhere for 4 years. And while probably the majority of their experiences will be on campus, what exists outside of campus can be and will likely be an extension of their experience. So make sure that they're also considering what these communities look like and what they have to offer, and help them understand what that fit may look like for them, because these can be really important considerations, ones that may not rise to the top. But again, if we're thinking about optimization, they can be really good perspectives to consider. And another piece is, as a parent, what are you comfortable with? And does that influence how your child will explore different college settings, right? For some of you, you may have a strong foot in saying, like, I don't want my child in a city. I want them in a suburb. And my child is okay with that. Sometimes there can be some tension that exists around that. But if we're honest about where we are, then we can find, again, the best places for what your child will need and what you as a parent feel comfortable with, because you are also entrusting them in the hands of the community, right? So I want you to feel good and empowered knowing that while you're sending your babies, that you feel good, that they'll be safe, right? And there's a difference between being uncomfortable, because I think growth can happen in the space of discomfort, and unsafe. And I don't want you and I don't want your child anywhere where they feel unsafe for any number of reasons. So let's make sure that we're having really thoughtful conversations about that. Distance is another one that can be really helpful for you to help your child understand. Lynn and I joke around that SCORE wasn't necessarily built for students who live in really dense cities, because 25 miles in a city can be Newark or going up to Yonkers. But if you live in the suburbs, 25 miles can be many, many towns and moons away, right? So like what we want you to think about and help your child understand is how far away from home do they want to be, right? Do they want to be a long drive away from home or a short flight, right? You can get to Syracuse in about an hour and a half, or you can drive and it be 6 hours. And a 6 hour drive can take you to, different parts of Pennsylvania. It can take you further south. It can take you deeper into the Midwest, right? Think about what feels right and what your child is more responsive to. How often do you think your child wants to be home for breaks? Are they someone that you anticipate struggling with homesickness? Are they okay with independence? Do you do everything for them? And are you a little afraid about them managing on their own? Or do you think they'll have the resilience to be okay with, you not being home to make that soup when they're feeling sick, or, when they need something sewn on their clothes, right? How comfortable is your child with that independence can really dictate how far away may feel right for them. If you're traveling cross country or you're making longer trips from home, are costs something that you and your family have to consider, right? You have to think about the fact that breaks are going to center around really heavy travel periods, right? So a flight from California during Christmas break, for rather during winter break, may be really, really expensive. It may not be worth the cost of your child coming home for Thanksgiving if they're only going to be home for 4 days. And if that's a big concern for your child or you, or if you know that cost can be prohibitive, then make sure we're having these conversations, because perhaps we want to find more ideal communities that are closer to home. I also encourage students and families to consider politics and identity, right? We live in a really politicized time. And depending on the identities you carry and the intersections of those, that may make you feel more comfortable or less comfortable, or feel more safe or less safe, depending on what happens in the states of these communities, right? I think colleges can oftentimes feel like a bubble. So you feel protected, and what happens outside of the college campus, you may not feel it always in the same kinds of ways as if you live in that particular community. But these are real considerations that students are having, right? So it's important that you're having conversations with students. It's important that we're also checking biases as well, because I know that we may have particular associations with different parts of this country, but they may also have associations about us that may be completely wrong, right? So it's important to engage as opposed to ignoring the conversation. But if it doesn't matter for you, it doesn't matter for you. But I offer as another framing to consider. And lastly, for students who are thinking about studying outside of the US and getting their degree abroad, independence, I think, ends up becoming a much bigger conversation. Studying internationally is not for everyone. And from every counselor, student, and experience that I've gone through, I understand, and what has been spoken to us repeatedly is, for students who want to study internationally, they have to be independent. They have to be okay living on their own, because the idea of a residential college, as we understand it in the US, is going to feel very different abroad. They may have to get their own housing, live on their own, cook for their own, find grocery stores and do all of that on their own, because there's not a dining hall in the ways that we have them here. So if your child is considering this, we want to make sure that we're having these conversations, and importantly, building on the skills to get them comfortable with being independent. You can also filter here by selectivity. Now, SCORE doesn't necessarily identify which category means what in terms of selectivity rate, but this is a kind of mantra that we had the students chant during our class. More selective does not equal better fit. More selective does not equal more better. More selective means more rejective. So the more selective a school is, it means that they are denying a greater proportion of their students. And I know that as a country, as a culture, we really fixate on the most selective schools in our country, but it's important to recognize that that doesn't automatically mean it's a better fit for your child. Some of these schools are hyper competitive. Some of these schools can feel really cutthroat. Some of these schools can be really hard for even really smart students when they're in a sea of other really smart students, and then they get, taken down a couple pegs, right? I've met students who, when I worked at Penn, were really unhappy there, and they were there because they recognized the brand that they had when they graduated, right? And that's a hard reality to reconcile with. And I'm not here to pass judgment if that's what you want, if that's what your child wants, but I'm here to really complicate this idea of selectivity and making the association that it automatically means it's better. There are a lot of schools that are highly admissive. So they take the majority of their students, but who have some of the most amazing programs in the world, right? So when I think about schools that have particular strength in, let's say, aerospace engineering, I think about Purdue. They have one of the best aerospace engineering programs in the country. And the school itself, as a whole, is would probably be considered somewhat selective, right? The majority of students are still being admitted. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of decoupling these associations so that we're helping students see a variety of different types of schools. So as you're playing around with this filter, play around, toggle some of the options, see what comes up. Importantly, though, in our one-on-one work is when we will help you and your child understand what schools are reaches, what schools are targets, what schools are likelies, considering their academic profile, the programs they're interested in, and a variety of different factors. So this piece may feel a little more opaque right now, but in collaboration, we're going to help you figure those pieces out. Another important filter is about the type of school. And importantly is the differences between public and private universities. The main difference here is about funding, right? So public universities are funded by the state government, sometimes by the federal government, and the intention for these schools are to provide access for those within the state, which is why public universities tend to be cheaper on the offset for in-state residents, right? So even from an experiential perspective, what you'll see at a lot of these public universities, so think about a place like Binghamton, a place like the University of Wisconsin, Penn State universities, so on and so forth, is that the vast majority of students in that school will be from that state. So if your child is looking for geographic diversity, then perhaps a public institution is not the best fit for them, right? And going back to costs, even though the sticker price may be smaller, there's usually less financial aid available for students. So public universities can sometimes be the more expensive option, but of course, this depends on your family's need and your family's financial circumstances. Private universities are not or nonprofit private universities may be funded by a variety of different sources, so they are still beholden to and impacted by state policies if they're receiving state or federal funding, but their funding is more based off of tuition and generating from alumni donations, right? So you can see typically more socioeconomic diversity because perhaps there is more financial aid available for a bigger variety of students. So most of our students, if not all of our students, will be thinking about public and private non-for-profit universities. There are some private for-profit universities, and the difference again here is funding, is that the school itself is generating its own income. It's not accepting federal or student aid, federal or state aid rather. And again, a lot of these for-profit universities may be focused more on trades. So not necessarily what the bulk of our students will consider, but again, consider this perspective as you are thinking about different institutions. Another important filter can be religiosity and religious affiliation. So if we think about the beginning of higher education in this country, Harvard was the first colonial college that was established, and its purpose was to educate men for the clergy work, right? So there is a religious affiliation with the origins of Harvard. And for many universities, there is still a religious backing to them as an institution, right? most commonly seeing different types of Catholic or Christian denominations within school communities. And what's important to consider that is to consider one, the religiosity of your family and your child, and the ways in which they want to engage with that religion. So if they are looking at schools that have a religious backing, such as a school like Georgetown or Fordham as Jesuit schools, it doesn't mean that they have to be a part of that religion to attend, but it may mean engagement with that particular faith in some capacity, right? And it can be in terms of traditions, or it can be in terms of academic work, right? So it's not uncommon that if you attend a religiously affiliated school, that perhaps part of your general education requirements are going to be theology courses. Doesn't mean it's a theology course in relation to that particular religion, but it is going to engage students with religion and spirituality, right? So you have to think about how much that matters or doesn't matter to your child. The vast majority of schools in the US are going to be secular, so they're not going to have a religious affiliation to them, but that doesn't mean that your child shouldn't consider their own spirituality or religiosity in this process, right? So if your child identifies as Jewish and that's an important part of their culture and their faith, then perhaps they want to look for an active Hillel on campus. If they are Catholic, if they're Muslim, if they're Christian, if they practice any religion and they want a space of worship, what does that look like on campus, right? Is it a catch-all space for all students, or are there different spaces for different practices? Is there a university chaplain, so for someone who is designated to engage with religious and spiritual life? And if that matters, make sure that you're helping your child seek those pieces out. The other filter, which is not super comprehensive here at SCORE, would be special mission colleges. I'm going to ask you to ignore Coalition for College. That is a separate conversation that we don't have time for. But SCORE does allow students to filter by historically Black colleges and universities. But those aren't the only type of institutions that serve specific populations. There are also schools that are designated as historically Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and of course, women's colleges. So that if you know that these are parts of your child's legacy or identities, and they want to explore that, make sure that you're talking about it with your college counselor, and we can help you identify opportunities within those categories. If your child is interested in the ROTCs, the Reserve Officers Trainings Programs, this can be a really great opportunity if your child wants to serve in the military to any capacity. There are scholarships that are available for students who are interested in applying to ROTC, or some students may want to go into service academies. So in an environment in which you are still doing college, but you're doing a college in a more kind of focused kind of way, with the intention of serving this country afterwards, right? Another way to filter out programs pretty easily and identify schools that have ROTC programs across the country. Our last tip on SCORE is that there's also ways that you can filter out by athletic interests, personal interests, or even application methods. And what I will say for now is to leave these alone, leave these blank, because what will matter more if you're thinking about athletics, if you think about student life or clubs and organizations, is to really look at that through the school's website themselves to see what the school offers, what does its athletic divisions and departments look like, what kind of clubs and activities exist there. With clubs and activities, as you can imagine, that is dependent on the students who are there. So 1 year you may have a thriving bagpiping club, and the next 4 years it may go away if no student has interest. But as your students are thinking about community and the ways they want to engage and the kind of people they want to surround themselves with and the kinds of experiences they want to have access to, clubs and student life need to be a part of the search, right? It doesn't mean that they're not going to have an opportunity to explore something new. And in fact, most of them will. But within their first month of campus, and if they're thinking about clubs that they can make new friends and meet new people, that's a great way to connect. So if you know your child loves arts and crafts, or they love being a part of an intramural sports team, or you know that they love board games, or you know that they love whatever it is that they may love, help them identify student clubs and if they exist on campuses of interest. And that's another great way to think about community. SCORE, as you can imagine, is an imperfect tool. So just make sure that you are playing around with the settings, because you may miss out on some opportunities in case you're being very restrictive. So for instance, I would categorize Skidmore as a small liberal arts college, but because it's about 2,700 students, SCORE considers it a mid-sized university, right? So just know that there's some nuances that exist there. So you want to be a little bit more expansive, especially in this initial phase. They do have a compare tool, which helps you to see schools side by side, a great way to look across different types of institutions. And importantly, as your child is interested in schools, is seeing some attraction towards schools, make sure that they're following that school on SCORE. It's a signal to us as college counselors that they found something that resonates with them, so that if they need new recommendations and we look at their following list, we can see what they're liking and we can help them identify similar schools. But also, SCORE has a lot of cool functionalities built within it that are going to feel very social media-esque to help you explore and better understand these communities. So take advantage of the vast resources that SCORE has to offer. As we round out our conversation, I wanted just to quickly talk about some other ways you can gather information at home with your children. So SCORE and the FIS Guide are definitely two really great resources. Every child, we purchase a FIS Guide for every single child. It's a gigantic green textbook. If you have not seen it laying around your home, then make sure that your child comes pick one up from our office, because we still have some here available. As I mentioned earlier, virtual information sessions are incredible. Take advantage of them. You will find them directly through the admissions websites of these colleges, but you may also visit UVisit, which is a website that does host online virtual tours of a variety of different schools. And even Amazon, if you have an Amazon Prime membership, has a series called The College Tour, and it's a great insight, 6 or 7 seasons at this point, that gives you a really great insight in a different kind of way to explore a variety of different colleges. The college websites themselves are going to be your primary source of information. This is really where your children will need to engage with the most, maybe not now, but certainly when they're getting ready to apply for colleges, because this is where, again, you're moving away from the idea of the school to the more tangible elements of who the school is, what they value, and what they offer. So encourage your students and you yourselves to read mission statements, core values, and future plans to get a better sense of the community, the institution, the administration, and how they help support and cultivate their student body. You want to look and research academic departments of interest, right? So if your child is really interested in business, understand who's there. Read some faculty bios, because these are going to be the people not only teaching your children, but these could be mentors. These can be people who connect them with internships or job opportunities, who would write recommendation letters for them. So it's important that your children know the people that they're going to have access to. Also look at research opportunities and, importantly, course offerings. So if you Google the name of a college, Skidmore College, course catalog, it'll be every single class that the university or college offers for this particular year, and a great way to read descriptions about different courses of interest. Another resource that's a favorite of mine are college newspapers. These are newspapers written for students, by students, with no university, most of the time, no university oversight. So you are going to read the good, the great, the bad, and the really bad, right? So as becoming an empowered consumer, an empowered college applicant, I want my students to know what they're getting themselves into. Again, they can't predict everything that will happen. Colleges, just as schools, will change with the students who are there. But if you're reading stories and articles about events, conversations, problems, challenges that the university is kind of grappling with, and you're still excited, then you know that your child has found a school that resonates with them, right? So anytime you're on a college campus, look up grab the newspaper, and I guarantee you're going to have great information there. Another great resource that may not resonate with the students the same that it would with you is to look for postgraduate plans and outcomes, hiring reports, or industry reports. So every college will send out a survey to their graduates 6 months after graduation to collect data about where they are, what they're up to, and how they're doing. And if you're thinking about return on investment, if you're thinking about, if we suggest a community that you have no idea about, and you're concerned about, well, does anyone know what the University of Rochester is, and how are kids doing, and like, is my child going to be okay? Look at the career services website and see where students are going, right? It can really be a great way to understand average salaries, to understand the industries that students are going into, the kinds of institutions and the kind of jobs that are students are being actively recruited at. You can see information about outcomes. So how many percentage of students are working or continuing education? And if they're continuing education, where are they going? What is the med school acceptance rate looking like? What's the law school acceptance rates looking like? This is great information, especially for families, because it can help open your eyes to new opportunities. But certainly, if you are footing the bill and you are having questions about the investment, because a college is an investment, and what that looks like, this could be a great way for you to learn more about the school and hopefully maybe even feel more inspired about what the school is doing for their students. Some resources to be a little bit more wary of, depending on how you like to engage with the internet. College Confidential was pretty hot in my day, but students still look at it. I think Reddit is probably more of the contemporary website of college information, of kind of message boards and stuff. You don't know who's putting up what. And a lot of times, in my experience, it's just students psyching themselves up or sizing themselves up. So you're not getting great information about that. There's a lot of videos on YouTube about how I got into this school, or you may see an article in the New York Times, and here's the recipe for success. And again, what works for one student isn't going to work for another student. And you can't take someone else, you cannot, or rather should not, take someone else's prescription. So just be wary of those. Social media is helpful, and I'm not painting it as the bad guy. Especially if you look at social media accounts that are not affiliated with the college, that's more just student accounts and what their experiences are. Those aren't inherently bad, but be mindful that that is one person's experience, and one person does not define a school of 60,000 people, right? So your children are engaging with it themselves. You should also engage with them just to see what's out there, to understand the narrative a little bit better. And again, it's imperfect, but it's real-time information that none of us had when we were going to college, if we went to college, right? So lean into it a little bit, lean into it actually a lot, but just take it with a grain of salt. Your neighbor's best friend's cousin's cat who lives across the street, kind of similar to like an earlier point I made. Another person's perspective isn't always going to be the best advice. Instead of letting the rumor mills kind of go wild, I'd rather you come talk to us. Come talk to me, come talk to Lynn. If you need to have a serious conversation, if you need to have an uncomfortable conversation, if there's something that just doesn't feel right to you, or you're hearing something that goes against what we're saying, talk to us. We want to be in partnership with you. Let us be the people who give you the information, so that if you're hearing others, you can kind of just process that in the way that you need to. And then lastly is rankings. And what I told, and we talked about this in our last session a bit, but there's a lot of different methodologies that go behind rankings, and rankings aren't reflective of a student experiences, of their happiness, of their measure of success. And I want you to complicate it, right? We all use rankings, or sometimes we're more susceptible to rankings than not. And I'm not ignorant to the fact that, it's part of our culture and part of our fabric. But as of everything, take it with a grain of salt, challenge it deeply, and really try to understand and better interrogate what you're trying to look at. Some metrics that I think are more helpful than the rankings would be graduation rates, right? At what rate are students graduating? Retention rates. Are students coming back year to year, right? Especially after their first year. Average indebtedness or average cost, or even the percentage of full-time faculty members can be an important consideration as you're thinking about and evaluating different options. So what I will leave you is with an assignment that we are giving our students for our next class. And it's an important assignment for them, but it's an important scaffolding that I want to leave you with as well. And we're asking students, what do you want and what do you need from your college education? And wants and needs are different. And as we're thinking about the search process, wants and needs are going to emerge in different kinds of ways. Sometimes some students have very strong wants. Sometimes they have no wants or no particular needs. Many times these needs become wants and vice versa, or they evolve. So give them grace within that. But if they can articulate and differentiate a want versus a need, this is going to be really helpful in the initial exploration phase, because we want to really make sure that every school that we identify has the students' needs met. And it's the icing on the cake if there's a want, right? So when I think about this in myself, this is not how I thought about my college search process. I've mentioned again, I'm a first generation college student. I did not know anything about it, about this process. There was no intention about it. There was adults in my life encouraging me to go, but we were operating off of goodwill and vibes. But if I were to go back and think about what 17-year-old Frank needed and wanted, what I would say is, and this is reflective of what I remember myself at this age, is I'm interested in business and economics, but in reality, I don't know much about different majors. I need a college that encourages academic exploration. I need a college that will provide me with substantial financial aid. I want a college that's smaller to develop relationships with peers and professors, but I know I need a college that doesn't have Greek life. So if I was counseling my younger self, I would really think about these needs as being the most essential preferences and helping me identify opportunities. And the wants could be the ones where we have a little bit more latitude to explore. So in this case, did I need a smaller school? No, I think I would have been okay at a bigger place, but the other needs were more essential to kind of where I was at that point in my life. So I hope that this was a helpful conversation in really thinking about preferences. And again, if you had a second meeting with your college counselor, this may be no surprise to you. But if you're gearing up for that family meeting, or you just want thoughts about how can I engage my child and asking them these big questions, my hope is that this was a framework that you can build off of and to continue to explore. Certainly, there may be other preferences that may be more particular to you and your family or to your child's needs. So, by no means is this exhaustive, but hopefully, this gives you a sense of how to, again, take 4,000 colleges in the US and start to really identify the right ones for your child. So, with the time that's left, I want to just address a couple of questions or one question that came up. And if anybody has any others, please, this is the time to do so. What is the best way to find out about the political leanings of colleges and universities? Is this something that is important to consider? This is a hot topic. This is a really, really hot topic. We are actually going to have a conversation in a couple of weeks about trends. Because you're going to see students engaging with this, right? Like the intersection between state politics, school and university politics. You know, preparing for my mini master for tomorrow with a group of students, I was looking at, taking a particular look at Florida and the ways in which Florida has been attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion politics, how that has impacted the public university system in Florida, and then reading from the perspective of Floridians, how has that navigated their child's college search, right? So in this particular framing, I was looking at stories for students who are identifying as LGBTQ plus, and for those Floridians, it's these students who would love to stay close to home, but don't feel safe doing that, right? They don't feel affirmed or feel this college is going to protect them in that perspective because of those identities. So they're looking elsewhere to find communities that are going to be more affirming, right? This is nuanced because I wouldn't say that a college would outright say we are this or we're that or we are hardcore conservative, we're hardcore liberal, right? They're going to defend the values of free speech and academic inquiry, but the ways in which students experience that campus can be different from student to student, given their identities and kind of the politics that they hold, right? But it's important that like campus newspapers, again, can be a great way to hear from students about how they're experiencing it. When you're on campus and if you're doing information sessions or you're hearing from current students, ask them about the political environment. Like, is this a politically active campus? Do you feel like folks are comfortable with dissenting opinions? Can you engage respectfully? If you protest, do you feel safe or do you feel not safe? Is my child apathetic and they don't care and like that's not their realm? Great. Are they still going to belong? Right? These are things that are going to be, we have to kind of stretch our curiosity to extend beyond what the school is saying. But this is where being plugged into like national politics, local politics is helpful. And if you have questions, Lynn and I can help support you there. Because again, we exist in this world more than most people, right? So we can help you kind of assess that as best we can. Another question that came in is, does SCORE or other service have information or filters about disability resources on campus or schools with extra supports? Can you point towards other easy to navigate resources? Fabulous question. SCORE unfortunately doesn't have tools about support services. There are resources that I'm happy to pass along to families and in fact, I will pass them along when I send out the recording of this particular session. I want everyone to have access to it. This can be a piece that can be another added layer that students need to consider, and families can help advocate and be a part of this process, right? Because there's a little bit of a difference about what is done, especially if your child has, for instance, an IEP or has particular learning needs that will happen in high school that will not happen in college in the same kinds of ways. Your child has to go and seek out those support services. And a kind of a really great illustration that an admissions officer gave me once was, if you're on the college tour and the Learning Resource Center is in the dark, dreary basement of a library, what does that tell you about the college's, how the college treats those students, and how then do students feel about the physical space and accessing that physical space, right? Or is it somewhere like really central where it's everyone can see it, it's there, there's no stigma around it, and folks are getting the support services that they need? That implicitly has a different kind of message and is something that you should be considering. But again, because these needs can vary student to student, given what their particular needs are, it is something that on one-on-one conversations, we will share and partner with you in this. And I will share some resources that I'm aware of for more general information. Okay. So I want to be mindful of time. It is 1:01, and I try my best to keep these webinars to 1 hour. So thank you guys so much for your time. If, as always, if there are questions, if there's something that we didn't address, please let me know. These sessions for me are so much fun. And importantly, I think about what I wish I knew. I think about what I wish my parents knew. And my mission is to make sure that you all feel as good, knowledgeable, and empowered as your child does, so that you know the options and the sky's the limit, and you feel really good and intentional about everything. So until next time, friends, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.